Greetings and welcome to In-Depth. I'm Dike Rostant. We are speaking about more than birds and bees with Biodiversity Specialist, Dr. Lena Dempewolf. It is time to talk about pollinators and their importance. Welcome, Dr. Dempewolf. Thank you so much for joining us. I started off a bit cheekily, but at the same time, let's begin with a definition of pollinators. Thank you.
Hello, thank you very much for having me. Pollinators, in a very simple way, are animals that go back and forth between flowers and carry pollen from the male parts of the flower to the female parts of the flower. That can happen between flowers on the same plant or flowers on a different plant. And that is necessary to facilitate the production of fruit and so on, so that the plant can reproduce.
And is it a matter of having specific pollinators for specific flowers, or some like one type of flower more than others? Because I can imagine if one pollinator tries to visit everybody, it makes a little less sense in terms of for that specific plant or flower to become pollinated.
Yes, so it depends. Some pollinators are generalists, so they visit a whole wide range of flowers. So, for instance, the honeybees that we know and love and get the honey from, and propolis and wax and so on, they are called super generalists because they visit almost every flower. But there's some that are also highly specific. So, for example, orchid bees go and visit orchids, but mostly the males because they collect the scents to impress the females. So different types of pollinators are good for different types of plants. For example, avocado trees are largely pollinated by a type of stingless bee and so on. So it depends. Some, there's a very narrow niche and definition of what a pollinator is for that plant, and in some it can be visited by a lot of different organisms.
So how do you go around finding out, okay, well, this one is good for this is a super generalist, or is it that people do the work and people build upon the studies that have gone before? And I also want to ask, why should we care if we want to be a little crass about it?
Okay, so let me go with the why should we care first. That's the easier one. The vast majority of our food production, not just in terms of quantity of food, but also quality of food, depends on pollinators. While there are a lot of foods out there that are wind pollinated, what has happened over time is that we are now propagating more and more plants that require insect pollination, or animal pollination, I should say, on a whole, because birds and bats and so on also pollinate. But the quality is also affected. The quality of the fruits are considerably higher once they're pollinated by animals than in any other way, shape, or form. So if pollinators were to disappear, we wouldn't only face a shortage of food, but also a shortage of nutrition. For example, lots of crops that are producing vitamin A are animal pollinated. And if they were to disappear, then there would be a nutrition shortage in that area as well. So we should care. But also, aside from the food, pollinators also really pollinate native plants, native trees. So anything that you benefit from in terms of going to the beach, for instance, or going on a hike, or just looking out of your window into your garden, all of that is there because of the pollinators supporting that. How do we know if something is a specific pollinator for something? That's a little more tricky. So it's easy to observe something visiting a flower, but whether it's actually a pollinator or not depends on a lot of different things. The pollinator has to be able to carry sufficient amounts of pollen grains, and the pollen grains have to be in the right spots. If the pollen grains are manipulated in some way or shape or form, so for example, bees that are social, like honeybees, they chew the pollen and stick them to their legs, that then is no longer good for pollination. So the manipulation matters, how far the pollinator is able to fly matters, the density of the plant matters. So there are a lot of different factors that go into that. And yes, it is research building on research and building on research. So that's a very technical thing. The way that people can contribute to this, though, is simply by starting with observations. So in Trinidad and Tobago, we have very little data on the pollinators that we have here. Part of the Best TT project that we're currently running was involved and working together with Jeff SGP and with the Trinidad and Tobago Field Naturalist Club to do a bee survey and identify bees. So we're starting to kind of get a bit of a better idea of what we have, but it's really just a baseline survey in very limited areas. What we encourage people to do is take pictures. If you see anything sitting on a flower, take a picture of it. There's an app called iNaturalist. Upload the picture. An expert will tell you what it is, and you can join our project, and that will then add to the general data that we have on flower visitation and pollinators so far.
And you have me going down a trippy rabbit hole, Dr. Dempewolf, in the sense that I still want to come back and ask you to expand a little more on pollinators improving the quality of our food. Thank you.
So even though in some places, because there have been pollinator shortages, so in some countries, hand pollination has been employed. So people's jobs is actually to go around with a paintbrush and take pollen off of one flower and brush it onto another flower. That produces fruit, but the quality of the fruit is not nearly as high as if the animals that originally co-evolved with the plants are doing the pollination. So even though humans can do some of the pollination, the quality of the fruit is not as high. And that has been proven over and over again. So the watermelon isn't as sweet and as nutritious, for example. That's one aspect. But also, if the pollinators are not there for certain types of crops that produce certain types of vitamins or minerals and whatnot, then we're just not going to get those fruits and vegetables, and that's going to result in us just not having these things and making it more difficult for us to access the food.
I like the fact that you talk about that coevolution. It makes me want to ask, is it a matter of having the plant first or the pollinator first? Or let me ask it differently. If I grow so like you're talking about avocados. So if I grow 3 or 4 avocado trees around wherever I am, do I expect to see more stingless bees?
Right. So I mean, evolution in its nature, it's a long process and takes a long time. The first known pollinators were thought to be beetles, and they may have been feeding on the pollen, and over time that relationship just developed and was so beneficial to the plant by the beetles carrying the pollen around that that relationship has become more established, and different types of organisms started feeding on the plants because the plants started producing more and more of the type of pollen that the animals would find nutritious and are attracted to. So that's that. But yes, if you're planting more plants that attract pollinators, you will see more of them in your area. The stingless bees, for instance, that's a group of bees that produces honey, and in much smaller quantities though, but it's also used for medicinal purposes. And that's also something we're trying to encourage. It's something that has been traditionally done in Trinidad and Tobago, but has sort of declined in popularity over time. So we're trying to encourage people to keep more stingless bees, especially because they're very good for our local plant species and some agricultural ones. So for instance, avocados. We've been told of bumper crops of avocados once you have a certain type of stingless bee, the Frisia mellita, around. So if you do plant certain plants, you will attract the pollinators. But what they need besides the food is also the habitat. So things like leaving logs around, leaving some leaf litter in some areas, not cutting your grasses frequently, or maybe having some areas in your yard that you can keep wild, not the whole thing, or planting some specific plants that they like. All of those things help attract pollinators and help support. You wouldn't believe how useful it is to have a small pollinator garden in your yard for these animals, especially if you have it doesn't matter what scale it's at. It could be small, it could be large. You can adjust it to what suits your needs and what suits your yard. But it makes an incredible difference for pollination on a whole, because the pollinators that you have there are not only pollinating your flowers, they will also go to the neighbors and to the agricultural fields nearby and just contribute to food production and maintaining biodiversity on a whole.
And I'm appreciating you on this conversation, Dr. Dempewolf. I'm imagining it's not an excuse the next time somebody tell me, hey, that grass look like it's time to cut. I said, no, man, I'm encouraging pollinators. But we actually take a short break.
Yeah.
We will return with more. We are speaking with Biodiversity Specialist, Dr. Lena Dempewolf. Stay with us. We'll return with more. Welcome back. We are speaking with Biodiversity Specialist, Dr. Lena Dempewolf, and we went through the first half of the conversation. Yes, you alluded to it, but we didn't get an overview of BestNet TT, so we do that now. Thank you.
Sure. So currently, the Ministry of Planning and Development, in conjunction with UNDP, is executing the BestNet TT project. We were fortunate enough to receive funding from BestNet, which is a global organization, to conduct a project on pollinators. So it started in 2021, and we are wrapping up this year, at the end of the year. And our focus is improving the science, policy, and practice surrounding pollinators and their management. So we are doing several research activities. So as I mentioned before, we are doing a bee survey. We are supporting seagrass pollination research. There has been some work done on bat pollination. We're creating a pollinator catalog. Those are just some of the activities. And under the policy component, we have a theory of change workshop coming up, and we will be doing more things in that area. And we've had lots of outreach activities going on, a workshop series teaching people about stingless beekeeping and other aspects. And we are also creating materials for primary and secondary school use that can fit into the syllabus. So there's lots of stuff going on in those areas.
But when you talk about getting some of that information, and it carries me back to the iNaturalist app, when you send that picture in, is it logged somewhere that the project can avail itself of the information also? Or does that just go out and the person gets the information and the dots don't connect?
Yes, so on iNaturalist, it's a website and it's an app. And on iNaturalist, you create a user profile, and you can then join certain projects. So we have a project on there called Pollinators and Pests of Trinidad and Tobago, which you can join. And once you join the project and then you upload your picture and your observation, it's a very simple process. There's a tab on the website that explains it very well on how to do it. Once you do that, you can then add your observation to our project. And all of these observations are then accumulated in one place. Anybody that wants to use the data can. There's a download button. You can download all the observations from the project. You can do whatever you want with it. So it's a way of people sharing their knowledge as well. And we really encourage people to use this app because it helps us tremendously, because not only does it give us information and show us pictures of the potential pollinators, but it also gives us more information on the association. So we are now seeing that this particular animal is landing on this flower. So that's very useful. But anybody can use it, anybody can contribute, and there are tons of experts on there that assist in identifying species. So yes, it's a live version of Pokemon Go, if you will.
Gotta catch them all turreted. But with regard to the stingless beekeeping, is that something that is encouraged for domestic use? I know you spoke about smaller quantities of honey, but what are the applications if we're looking at it domestically?
So the stingless bee honey is different from the apis, from the honeybee honey. The properties are different, and because we have so many different species now, Initially, there were about 10 or 12 recorded, but through our bee survey, we are actually covering quite a few more species that have not previously been recorded here. Each species produces different honey, and the properties are different. So traditionally, the honey has been used for things like wound healing, cataract, and so on. Now, I can't confirm as to the use and so on because it's sort of a traditional use. But the honey itself has a bit of a different taste as well. There's less produced, but again has a very high value because of the medicinal properties that it carries. We do encourage people to, even if they want to keep them, anything from keeping them as pets to keeping them as something that you can earn a little money on the side. It probably will not make you enough to have it as a full-time occupation. But because they're stingless, they can be kept in your house and you can face them out through breeze blocks. They're not going to sting. There are only one or two species that can possibly nip you a little bit, but most of them do not bite. And they're very easy to handle and manage. And we have a ton of resources on stingless bee management. All of our workshops and so on are recorded and available on our YouTube channel. So if you look for BestNet TT, you will find all of the resources there. We have webinars, we have everything else. Everything is available for the public to use. And if you would like us to help you with anything, you can always contact us and we can assist.
Thank you so much. And in the last minute and a half we have, in terms of issues, threats, actions to mitigate, what are some of the biggest things on the agenda, even though you said the project is wrapping up at the end of this year, but what are you working feverishly to finish?
Well, we're feverishly trying to finish up our, guidelines for assessing pollinators. We're trying to wrap up little things here and there, but the things that I think that deserve attention in the future would really be the threats. So habitat destruction is a major thing, and pesticide use is another one that is a big problem. So those are sort of the key things that I would flag, especially for a small island developing state like ours, where we just don't have the land mass to have more. So we really need to manage our resources wisely to be able to maintain the pollinators that we have.
And with that, we want to thank you very much, Biodiversity Specialist, Dr. Lena Dempewolf. And on behalf of the entire TTT News team, this has been In Depth with me. Thank you so much for joining us.